Breaking news tonight, and this is absolutely seismic. The United States Supreme Court just issued a 7-2 emergency order that is fundamentally changing the Second Amendment preservation fight forever. This isn't hyperbole. This isn't exaggeration. This is a direct, immediate shift in how the Second Amendment is treated by federal courts across the entire country, and the implications are staggering. A 7-2 vote on an emergency order means we have overwhelming agreement among the justices spanning across ideological lines that something so constitutionally serious was happening that they had to intervene right now, not months from now. This ruling has immediate nationwide consequences. Gun owners are celebrating. States with restrictive gun control laws are panicking. The Department of Justice is scrambling to figure out how to respond. And gun control advocacy groups are already mobilizing for what they know is going to be a massive legal battle. This isn't just another legal update that only matters to lawyers and constitutional scholars. This is a fundamental realignment of power between the government and the people when it comes to the right to keep and bear arms. 2 justices dissented, and we're going to talk about what that means and why even a 7-2 split represents an overwhelming mandate from the court. But first, you need to understand exactly what the Supreme Court just did, why they did it with such urgency, and what happens next in this explosive constitutional fight. Stay with me, because every second of this matters. Let me break down the emergency order in simple, high-impact terms so everyone understands exactly what the Supreme Court just did. The issue before the court involved injunctive relief, meaning someone was asking the court to immediately block enforcement of a law, policy, or government action that they claimed violated the Second Amendment. This could have been a state law banning certain firearms or accessories, a federal regulation imposing new restrictions, or an enforcement action by the ATF that was causing immediate harm to constitutional rights. The challengers argued that enforcement should be blocked immediately because every day the policy remained in effect was another day of constitutional violation. The government argued the opposite, that the policy was legitimate, that blocking it would harm public safety, and that the constitutional challenges should be resolved through the normal, slower legal process. The Supreme Court sided with the challengers in a 7-2 vote, issuing an emergency order that blocks enforcement of the challenged policy immediately. Emergency orders like this bypass the normal timelines of briefing, oral argument, and months of deliberation. The court uses these powers only when they see serious constitutional stakes that can't wait. The fact that 7 justices agreed to grant this emergency relief tells you everything about how clear the constitutional violation was. This wasn't a close call. This was the Supreme Court looking at what the government was doing and saying, "No, this stops right now." The decision affects gun owners immediately, not years down the road after appeals and remands, but today. Whatever burden the policy was imposing is now lifted. Whatever prosecutions were being threatened are now on hold. Whatever restrictions were preventing lawful conduct are now blocked. That's the power of a Supreme Court emergency order, and that's what just happened. Now let's talk about why this case matters and the history behind this fight, because understanding the context is essential to grasping the magnitude of what just occurred. The legal battle that led to this emergency order didn't start yesterday. This has been building for months or even years, with gun rights organizations challenging restrictions that they argued violated the Second Amendment under the new standard established by the Bruin decision. Lower courts have been in chaos, some courts siding with gun owners and blocking enforcement, other courts siding with the government and allowing restrictions to continue. You had conflicting decisions coming out of different circuit courts, creating a patchwork where your constitutional rights depended on which state you lived in or which circuit had jurisdiction over your case. Some states were openly resisting Supreme Court guidance, passing new laws designed to evade Bruin's historical tradition test while still achieving the same restrictive outcomes. The Supreme Court has been watching this chaos unfold, and they've been forced to intervene repeatedly because federal agencies and state governments keep pushing new restrictions that appear to violate the Constitution. This case fits into a clear pattern. Since Bruen was decided, Second Amendment cases have been rising to the Supreme Court at an accelerating rate, and the court has consistently sided with gun rights when the constitutional violation is clear. What makes this emergency order particularly significant is that it shows the court's patience is wearing thin. They're not content to let lower courts drag their feet or let states play games with constitutional right. When the violation is obvious, the court is now willing to step in immediately and stop it. Let's examine why 7 justices agreed to issue this emergency order and why 2 justices dissented, because that voting breakdown tells us a lot about the current state of Second Amendment law. The 7-justice majority likely found that the challenged policy violated the Second Amendment under the Bruen historical tradition test. They probably concluded that the government failed to demonstrate any genuine historical precedent for the kind of restriction they were trying to impose. The majority may have also been concerned about government overreach, whether it was federal agencies exceeding their statutory authority, state governments ignoring Supreme Court precedent, or executive branch actors making up rules that weren't grounded in any legitimate legal authority. The fact that 7 justices agreed means this coalition likely included justices across the ideological spectrum, not just the conservative wing of the court. That's what makes this so powerful. When you get broad agreement on an emergency order, it signals that the constitutional question isn't even close. The government's position was so weak that justices who might normally be inclined to defer to government regulatory judgments couldn't support it. Now, 2 justices dissented, and their opposition matters because it shows where the legal fault lines are. The dissenters probably argued that emergency relief wasn't warranted, that the court should have let the case proceed through normal channels, or that the government's interests in enforcing the policy outweighed the constitutional concerns. They may have expressed worry about disrupting government functions or creating confusion with a sudden change in enforcement. But here's what's critical. Even with 2 dissents, a 7-2 split still represents overwhelming agreement on the court's direction. This isn't a fragile 5-4 decision that could flip with 1 retirement or 1 change of mind. This is a strong majority sending a clear, unmistakable message about how the Second Amendment must be treated. Now let's talk about the instant impact of this decision, because the changes are happening right now as we speak. Gun owners who were being prosecuted or threatened with prosecution under the blocked policy now have immediate relief. Those cases will likely be dismissed or put on hold pending resolution of the constitutional questions. States that were enforcing the challenged law must halt enforcement immediately. No more arrests, no more penalties, no more confiscations based on that policy. Federal agencies like the ATF that were using the policy as a basis for enforcement actions must stop those activities right now. The nationwide ripple effects are enormous. Other lawsuits challenging similar restrictions are now massively strengthened, because plaintiffs can point to this emergency order as evidence that the Supreme Court views these kinds of policies as constitutionally suspect. States that were considering passing similar laws will now think twice, knowing that the Supreme Court is watching and willing to intervene quickly. Other states that already have similar laws on the books are suddenly facing a wave of new legal challenges emboldened by this decision. This emergency order also weakens federal regulatory authority in areas touching the Second Amendment, because it demonstrates that the court won't allow agencies to stretch their authority beyond what the Constitution permits. And here's something really important to understand. Emergency orders often hint at the likely final outcome when the case is fully argued on the merits. But the Department of Justice and anti-gun states aren't going to accept this quietly, and the fight is about to intensify dramatically. The DOJ is expected to respond aggressively to this kind of ruling. They'll likely file motions asking the court to reconsider or narrow the scope of the emergency order. They'll issue guidance to federal agencies trying to minimize the impact and preserve whatever enforcement authority they can. They'll coordinate with state attorneys general who share their views to mount a unified legal and political response. We're going to see brewing conflicts on multiple fronts. Appeals will be filed challenging the emergency order or trying to distinguish other policies from the one that was blocked. New regulations will be drafted with slightly different language, with the government hoping that minor changes will somehow make unconstitutional policies constitutional. There will be attempts to delay compliance, with some jurisdictions dragging their feet on implementation and hoping the political or legal situation changes before they're forced to fully comply. Gun control states like California, New York, New Jersey, and Illinois might attempt to defy or resist the implications of this ruling. Let's zoom out and look at the national fallout, because this emergency order reshapes the entire Second Amendment landscape for the long term. This decision fundamentally alters how Second Amendment cases will be litigated going forward. Lower courts now have clear guidance that when gun rights are at stake and the government's historical justification is weak, emergency relief is appropriate. That means gun rights plaintiffs will be emboldened to seek preliminary injunctions and emergency stays, knowing the Supreme Court is willing to grant them. This emergency order connects directly to other major cases pending at the Supreme Court involving magazine capacity limits, assault weapon bans, carry restrictions, and other gun control measures. Each of those cases is now being analyzed in light of this decision, and the outcomes are likely to favor gun rights more strongly because of the signal the court just sent. What we're seeing is a consistent pattern of the Supreme Court protecting gun rights in emergency contexts. Time and time again, when faced with restrictions that appear to violate Bruin's framework, the court is intervening quickly rather than letting constitutional violations continue. That pattern is building momentum and creating a legal environment where gun control measures face a much higher bar for survival. This fight just entered a new phase, and you need to understand what that means for the future of the Second Amendment in America. A 7-2 emergency order is rare and carries enormous weight in the legal system. It's not something lower courts can dismiss or minimize. It's not something the government can work around with clever lawyering. It's a definitive statement from the highest court in the land that constitutional rights matter and that violations will not be tolerated. This ruling places the Second Amendment on stronger ground than it's been in decades, maybe generations. The court is making it clear that the right to keep and bear arms is a real, enforceable right, not a second-class constitutional protection that can be regulated out of existence. The forward momentum here is undeniable. Upcoming hearings on related cases are going to be shaped by this emergency order. Oral arguments are going to reference it, briefs are going to cite it, and final opinions are going to build on the principles it establishes. The potential nationwide implications are staggering. We could be looking at a comprehensive dismantling of decades of gun control laws that were built on constitutional foundations that no longer exist. This decision will be remembered as a turning point, the moment when the Supreme Court stopped tolerating government gamesmanship and started enforcing the Second Amendment with real teeth. The preservation fight isn't slowing down, it's accelerating. Gun rights advocates are mobilized and winning. The legal landscape is shifting in their favor, and the Supreme Court is backing them up with decisive action. So stay informed, stay engaged, and understand that what we're witnessing right now is history being made. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next major development, because trust me, there are more explosive decisions coming. Drop a comment and let me know what you think about this 7-2 emergency order. Does it give you hope for the future of constitutional rights, or are you worried about the backlash? I want to hear your perspective. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.